Today's Bible passage about submission is arguably one of the more difficult and challenging passages we find in the Bible, and it's the example of Abraham in Genesis chapter 22. Abraham, you may recall, was promised by God that through him he would have a son, an heir, and through his line that his descendants would eventually be more than the stars of the sky, even though Abraham and Sarah were old and had no children. That's an important part of the context to understand as you hear these verses. After these things, God tested Abraham. He said to him, "Abraham," and he said, "Here I am." He said, "Take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains that I will show you." So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him and his son Isaac. He cut the wood for the burnt offering and set out and went to the place in the distance that God had shown him. On the 3rd day Abraham looked up and saw the place far away. Then Abraham said to his young men, "Stay here with the donkey. The boy and I will go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you." Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. So the 2 of them walked on together. Isaac said to his father Abraham, "Father?" And he said, "Here I am, my son." He said, "The fire and the wood are here, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering?" Abraham said, "God himself will provide the lamb for a burnt offering, my son." So the 2 of them walked on together. When they came to the place that God had shown him, Abraham built an altar there and laid the wood in order. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on top of the wood on the altar. Then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to kill his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham." And he said, "Here I am." He said, "Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." And Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. Abraham went, took the ram, and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, "The Lord will provide," as it is said to this day, "On the mount of the Lord it shall be provided." The angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, "By myself I have sworn, says the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will indeed bless you, and I will make your offspring as numerous as the stars of heaven and the sand that is on the seashore. And your offspring shall possess the gate of their enemies, and by your offspring shall all the nations of the earth gain blessing for themselves, because you have obeyed my voice." So Abraham returned to his young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham lived at Beersheba. Well, there's a whole lot in this passage that I don't have time to unpack in just a brief morning devotional. On the one hand, it's obviously psychologically and emotionally just terrifying and frightening to think of a father binding his own child, and what that Isaac must have been thinking, that his own father was going to murder him and kill him as an offering to God. But I think part of how I at least find something redeemable in this passage is, first of all, that God doesn't call Abraham to actually sacrifice Isaac. And in fact, this story is an example to Israel that God does not desire human sacrifice or the sacrifice of someone's firstborn to God. So this becomes a story in the midst of other cultures where human sacrifice was practiced, to say in Israel, this is no longer to take place. So I find some, at least, salvation in thinking of that. And also that what God did not demand of Abraham, the death of his own son, and you think of Isaac carrying the wood for the fire. Later in the life of Jesus, we will see God's own son carrying the wood of the cross and giving his own life in a way that God doesn't want us ever to have to do. It's a terrible test that Abraham faces, but through his faith and his obedience, we have been blessed in the process.